If you are looking for the old world reset in a layer of buried mud or some overnight apocalyptic cataclysm, you are looking in the completely wrong place. The real reset didn't erase millions in a single day. It was... Wait, let me start over. I need to get this right for the record. The true erasure was a bureaucratic maneuver, a surgical one. It started with a legal concept called Filius Nullius, son of nobody. You want to know when the old world actually ended? It wasn't a flood. It was the Minnesota Adoption Law of 1917. That is the exact moment the state realized it could legally seal a birth certificate. Think about what that actually means in physical terms. A heavy piece of paper, stamped in ink, locked inside a cold steel filing cabinet that permanently severs a human being from their own bloodline. The state steps in, looks at a child, and says, "Your biology no longer exists. We are the author of your identity." It is clinical. It is a terrifyingly quiet way to destroy a lineage. When you hold one of those old sealed records, you aren't holding a document of protection. You are holding a death warrant for a family tree. Look at the New York Foundling Hospital, founded in 1869. Sister Mary Irene Fitzgibbon. The official history says it was charity, saving abandoned babies from the freezing cobblestone streets of Manhattan. And sure, on an individual level, I don't doubt the nuns thought they were doing God's work. But you have to look at the mechanics of the institution. Look at the Foundling Wheel. It was this literal wooden cylinder built directly into the brick wall of the hospital. A mother stands on the street in the dead of night. She places her baby inside the wooden alcove. She turns the wood. The cylinder rotates inward. The mother stays on the cold pavement. The baby goes inside the warm building. That physical rotation. It is a machine for amputating the past. The wood creaks, and a child goes in with a history, maybe a note pinned to a blanket, maybe a mother who couldn't afford bread. The wheel turns. The child comes out the other side as administrative property. They stripped them, renamed them in bulk. Thousands of kids just arbitrarily assigned new surnames from a heavy leather ledger. They built an archive that had no parental traceability by design, not by accident, by design. It was a neutralization chamber for human identity. But you can't just keep them all in New York. The volume was too high. The brick buildings were overflowing. That is where Charles Loring Brace comes into the picture. The Children's Aid Society. The Orphan Trains. From 1854 all the way to 1929, they loaded 250,000 kids onto iron trains and shipped them to the rural in 250. The official story is that this was an early adoption program. It wasn't. If you actually read the paperwork, they were indenture contracts. It was a labor distribution system. Point. From the perspective of someone looking at population movement, it is a dispersion tactic. You take a massive batch of newly blank-slated identities, children with arbitrary ledger names, and you scatter them across the continent. You strip their regional accents, change their religion to match the host family. If there were brothers and sisters, you separate them. You put the older brother on a dairy farm in Kansas, and the younger sister in a timber town in Nebraska. Why? Because siblings have a shared memory. If you separate them, the group memory dies. The old context is completely gone. You just have isolated units, working in fields, answering to a new name, sleeping in unfamiliar beds. The cold steel tracks rattling under those wooden train cars. That was the physical sound of a bloodline being deleted from the earth. Listen, I don't believe in conspiracies. I really don't. You know me. I hate that stuff. The whole men in a smoky room planning the century garbage. It's lazy thinking. It ignores how chaotic the world actually is. But you don't need a grand conspiracy if you have an industrial supply chain. Look at the data objectively. Just step back from the emotion of it. If a supply chain logistician was given a blank check and told, "I need you to create a severe demographic bottleneck, I need a total genealogical DNA rupture across an entire continent, and you have 50 years to do it, but you cannot use lethal force," what would they build? They would build exactly this. They would build the Orphan Trains. They would build the Foundling Hospitals. You don't need to kill an old population if you can just break their lineage, scramble the human pieces, and reattach them to fake roots. It is just human capital logistics. The movement of bodies from high-density urban centers to low-density rural zones, completely wiping the serial numbers off the cargo in transit. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. The part where the official narrative just breaks down completely. The 1890 US Census. It was the master document of the American population, 63 million people recorded in ink. It detailed immigration status, naturalization, it was the absolute map of who came from where, right before the massive bureaucratic standardization of the 20th century hit. January 10th, a fire in the basement of the comedy. Firefighters flooded the vault with water. Whatever didn't burn turned to a soggy, illegible pulp. Almost the entire thing was destroyed. Do you understand the entropy here? In 1917, Minnesota passes the law that allows the state to seal future origins behind closed birth certificates. And 4 years later, the one master document that could prove the past origins of all those displaced people burns to the ground. The before is turned to ash and water damage. The after is sealed by law behind a closed vault. The vacuum is perfect. The 30-year blackout between 1880 and 1910 is a dark zone where millions of lineages simply float, completely disconnected from their ancestors. The smell of wet, burned paper in that basement in Washington. That was the smell of the old world actually disappearing. So what happens next? You have a fragmented population. You have to build the new reality. You use the paper wall. It is the period of civil registration standardization between 1900 and 1930. You have census takers walking up to wooden porches in the middle of nowhere, heavy leather-bound books under their arms. They are talking to farmhands who don't read, who barely speak English, or who are grown orphans from the trains. The guy with the fountain pen just writes whatever he wants. He changes the spelling of the surname because he doesn't know how to spell it. He changes the age. He Americanizes the name right there on the clipboard. The ink dries on the page, and reality is altered. Have you ever looked through those old microfilms and seen how many people suddenly have a birthday of January 1st? It is everywhere. It is not a coincidence. It is a null value. The bureaucrat didn't know. The person didn't know. So they just wrote 0101. The stroke of a pen created a new historical person. The paper did not record reality. It manufactured it. If you were not on the government's paper by 1920, you legally did not exist. The document became the flesh. The bureaucracy became the blood. And then the trap snaps completely shut. The 1920 US Census becomes the new baseline, the new database. The shift from a rural, informal memory culture to a rigid institutional bureaucracy is complete. Think about the timeline. Those kids from the 1880s Orphan Trains. In 1920, they are adults. They are having their own children. And they are passing down the artificial surnames they were assigned back in New York or on a train platform in Missouri. The past was surgically amputated in a single generation. One generation. That is all it takes to erase a world. People walk around these majestic, heavy stone buildings in old downtowns today. Architecture that feels like it belongs to another timeline, carved stone faces and massive, and they wonder why it feels disconnected. It feels disconnected because the population walking past those buildings on the asphalt is suffering from documented amnesia. The buildings are original. The people are replacements. The continuity was broken by a clerk with a stamp. Which brings us to right now. The fallout. Consumer DNA tests. Millions of people spitting into a little plastic tube, mailing it off, and waiting for their neat little pie chart of heritage. But that is not what a lot of them are getting. They are opening their results and hitting a wall. NPEs, non-paternity events, genetic black holes right around the late 19th century. The paper trail says they are a miller from Ohio. The county records say it, the census. But the blood says something completely different. It says they have no connection to the millers. It shows cousins that shouldn't exist. It shows origins that do not match the historical record. The paper tree and the blood tree are totally divorced. I was sitting in the Federal Archives yesterday, looking at these 1920 ledgers. The air was dry. The smell of decaying binding glue and old dust was everywhere. You sit there in the silence, and you can almost hear the metal keys of the old typewriters hitting the platen. Clack, clack, clack. Just hammering new names over old bones. The old world reset didn't bury the cities in mud. That is a theatrical bedtime story for people who cannot handle the sheer, crushing banality of the paperwork. It didn't bury the cities. It simply changed the locks, substituted the residents, and handed them a piece of paper with a new name.